Great stuff. Did everybody hear that? So you're aware we're being recorded. Okay, lovely. Well, we are very lucky with our panel tonight. We have with us Adam Glenn and Molly Young and indeed Philip Offey from Hallucid Theatre Company. You want to give us a wave, everybody? Lovely. Then we've got Joe Strickland from Chronic Insanity Theatre, and we've got Tanya Holland Williams from Fat Lady Opera. What I'm going to each of the presentation about their tales from remote theatre making is I'd like to ask each of them in turn to just give us a quick introduction to who they are, what the company's about, what work they've been up to, a little bit of CV for everybody so that you know who we're talking to. So shall we start with Adam and then move on to...
Sure. Hello, I'm Adam Glenn, and I recently graduated. I graduated in 2020 from the University of Kent, and started up Hallucid Theatre with these lovely guys. Yeah, I'll quickly talk a little bit about Hallucid, but not too much. We're an immersive theatre company, and also was biographical. So that was very interesting to get into the digital.
Hallucid is predominantly very collaborative. So despite that, I tend to do kind of the producer role for Hallucid. I'm Molly, by the way. I also graduated from University of Kent in 2020 from Drama and Theatre. That's how we all three of us had met. We're on the same course together. Yeah.
I'm Philip, also graduated last year. Yeah, it's been, well, Hallucid is very much a company that puts the audience at the forefront of everything. So it's very much you and the narrative together going through this journey. So hopefully we can just discuss more of that in a bit.
Great stuff, thank you. Should we move on to Joe? Joe, will you give us a quick 1 minute rundown of your entire life?
Sure. I'm Joe. I'm a theatre maker, a digital producer and creative technologist, currently based in Nottingham. I'm artistic director of Chronic Insanity. We're a theatre company that performs shows in found, traditional and digital spaces. We always make sure that we have affordability, accessibility and sustainability at the core of our work. And our main thing as a company is that we perform 12 shows in 12 months, and we're just finishing up our second year of having achieved that.
I am quite blown away by that. I'm going to have to hear more about that. I'm used to doing a show every month. Ooh, there you go. So now, finally, last but by no means least, let's hear from Tanya Holland Williams. Tanya. Oh, you're still muted at the moment, Tanya.
Hi, Kate.
Oh, rookie error. Hi again. I run Fat Lady Opera, which is a company that tries to put opera at the heart of as much performing arts as possible. I feel in awe of Joe because we aim to do one main opera production a year. Yeah, and similarly, we work largely with spaces that we feel communities might want to come and respond to, rather than try to apply an opera to a space, if that makes sense. So yeah, and there'll be more of that later on.
Interesting stuff. Fantastic. Okie doke. Well, we're going to hear from each of our participant companies in turn. Hallucid. So interestingly, I said hello this evening to Philip by explaining that my daughter had been raving about the virtual date that she had gone on with Philip as part of Philip 21. And I'm sure we're going to hear more about that now, but and the other projects from Hallucid. So please take it away and tell us about your your recent projects and how you've coped with the whole requirements of virtual theatre as opposed to live stuff. strange times we're living in?
Where to begin? From the start, probably. Um, as we've mentioned, we all graduated in 2020. I was about to say last year, and I'm pretty sure it still is, but time is all relative at the moment. So who knows? It could have been 5 years ago. I'm rambling now. I'll pass it over to Mara.
Okay, well, so we started working together just after we graduated. We got a residency at UKC, University of Kent. So we're gaining some mentorship from the university, and we had a little office space. But as you can imagine, things weren't planning out as we had hoped. So we were moving into September and October, hoping to kind of, be out the other end of the pandemic and to move into theatre. And so we were looking back at some previous work, and Philip, back in that January of 2020, had written a little piece about dating, and we were thinking, okay, maybe we could make something, we could develop that piece theatrically now. But obviously, like I said, things weren't panning out. So we discovered this funding scheme with Screen South, the New Creatives scheme, which was a mentorship and funding opportunity. So we applied for it with this idea of developing this piece that Philip had written back in January into a interactive short film. And at the time we really didn't even know what an interactive piece was. We looked into Bandersnatch and Bergenheim Trainer, which is, I don't know if anyone knows, it's like a kind of, it's a training kind of app, I guess, that it tracks your facial expressions and your speech pattern to help you get into this really exclusive club in Berlin. And we were like, yeah, let's do this, having no idea what this actually is and how to code it. So we applied for the funding, and amazingly we got it. And we were like, okay, so how do we build this interactive film, and how would we script this, and how would we discover all these different branching narratives and all this stuff? And none of us had really had any kind of previous experience with film anyway, and we discovered that it was so different to theatre. And I think we all knew that it was different, but like it was so different, if you know what I mean. So that was very interesting, and like very early on in the process, we sat down in our living room all together and rolled out like this large bit of Christmas wrapping paper and just tried to like draw out all these different branches and stories and stuff, to try and discover visually where we wanted to go with it. Yeah, does someone want to jump in? I feel like I'm just the only one talking about it.
Drafting paper was probably the most fun part of that beginning. For a while, we were kind of just wondering, like, how do we actually write this thing? And luckily, we had help from our producers and a man named Joey from BBC R&D. He was perfect. Like, he literally said, yeah, just do all this. And we had to use this software called Storyformer, which made it slightly easier, but also slightly harder, because there was so much things to like understand, like all this coding and where to put things. And there's a thing called variables, I don't know if you know that, but like variables make everything even much harder. So yeah, it was, I think, so the first thing we had to do was obviously write the script. And that was quite difficult. It was fun to start with because we had all these ideas. We wanted to put in all these questions that we wanted to ask people and gauge values from different people, what they like. So music and like a question like, what kind of biscuit would you be? Stuff like that. Like if you're a biscuit, I don't know. but we went through about like what 5-6 drafts of writing this. Like, yeah,
Heaven at some point.
they were super long as well, and we didn't realize that a page is like a minute of dialogue or whatever. So we had like 70 pages, meaning we had like over an hour of like content we needed to film. We were like, yeah, that's totally fine, that's cool, whatever. We kept getting it back, like, no, no. But writing an interactive story is so different from writing like a play or like a screenplay. It's, you have to like search for different like ways that it could go, and you have to kind of go back to that and make sure that it does follow the same way, doesn't get caught up in its own little thing. It's, yeah, it was a task, but it was really fun to write at the end of the day as well, because again, so many different possibilities.
Mm. From the start, what Philip wrote originally was for a project that we was making for our last year at uni, where we was all working together. It was originally called What the Remnants Make, and that was going to be an immersive experience about 5 people waiting for happiness in this kind of scrapyard, and we would make our own happiness. Hence why Philip wrote about his dating experience, and kind of he would go on dates with the audience. And then lockdown happened, the whole pandemic, and this was in our last year of uni. So that whole project basically got condensed down into I suppose, a film that we wanted to try and make it as interactive as we possibly could with, I suppose, our budget, which was, I think, £20 or something silly. So you can actually go on our website and watch that still. Please forgive us. It was all filmed in one room, and we tried our best. But yeah, so that turned into Philip 21, basically because we saw this piece that Philip wrote, and we didn't really want to use it for the film because we thought it was too good. It was too good for that, and it didn't have that interaction that we really wanted with the audience. So as Molly said, when it came to trying to get it funded, that was one of our biggest hurdles, was how was we going to try and make this digital experience something interactive, something immersive. And that's obviously when point of view focus, and you go on a date, but you're watching it on your screen. I suppose a bit like now you're seeing us on a screen, and you could chat to us. But obviously, Philip, as of this point, has about 1,600 interactive dates. So I think that would have been a bit difficult to do. Yeah.
Yeah, so by the end of the scripting process, that obviously moves us on to the filming process. And by this point, the film, as Adam has already said, during the film, if any of you have seen it, you are sat at the table opposite Philip, and the whole film is kind of based around that scene. Philip asks you questions, and you can answer, and you can interact with him. And you also move to another scene where you meet a character, Alfie, where actually the actor is here today, which is really lovely. And so you meet Philip's friend, and you sit back at the table, and things kind of unfold. So the concept of the film was quite easily shot, because we were just set up in a bar for about 3 days, and the shots were very much the same. It was just this point of view kind of shot. But I can imagine if for Philip, like, I don't know whether you wanted to comment on how you felt kind of acting towards, this camera. I think you kind of touched upon it earlier.
Yeah, it was a strange experience. Obviously, I've grown up in theatre, so I know how to act for theatre. Big movements, loud voices. I don't have a loud voice, but loud voices. So when it got to film, it was very much a case of I'm allowed to speak at my own volume, which I'm very happy about. But at the same time, I'm looking at this one camera dead on, and I have to act as if they are a person. And it was so difficult because, we're all about the liveness. We're all about having these reactions and the kind of like going off these reactions, like improving off of that and like carrying on, show must go on, kind of thing like that. But this was a case where it was, you do this, we're going to do another take. we're going to do a take, just one for safety. I'm like, okay, well, I'm repeating these lines and it's getting less and less fresh and less fun. It kind of got a bit frustrating, but it was very interesting to see how I could talk to someone that wasn't even there. So we even ended up naming the camera, called it Lily, after my friend, because like she's someone I'm very comfortable with. So I was like, yeah, I can call Lily, whatever. And the man behind the camera, his name is Gareth, amazing man. Also, he helped a lot because there was someone I could actually talk to. But acting for film is very different. And I know it's already done before. So doing that and having it such a close up and being able to kind of restrict your emotions a little bit and kind of show it in your face and your eyes it's just a whole different spectrum to theatre, because theatre is very much big and like loud and proud kind of thing like that. But so in a way I felt happy but also felt very out of my element. And I think the thing that was it was very fun to do a lot of takes. It was very fun to do a lot of takes. We just did a lot of takes and doing a lot of different things with them, trying to see what worked and what didn't. There was one take. I think it was about a question about cereal or something, and it wasn't landing. We did about like 6 takes and I wasn't giving the emotion that Adam needed, and that frustration actually helped me a lot because we're both frustrated. We're like, what are we doing here? It's like, just give me that, like, hurry up. And like, I was frustrated. I was like, I was very tired at that point. But we got it in the end, so that was pretty fun. That was pretty good.
Yeah, so sorry.
So we did 3 days worth of filming. So this was 2 days solely with Philip in front of the camera. So you can imagine how tiring that could get, especially for someone who's just used to theatre, and getting all of that out there and that kind of, and directing it straight towards one audience and getting stuff back. So a lot of that tiredness we started to getting in our stride in the second day. The second day was full of a lot of emotions, and especially for you, Philip, because this is an autobiographical piece. So a lot of those emotions and kind of revisiting them over and over again in different takes, I could imagine it was extremely straining. So what we ended up doing was I would take Philip somewhere quiet and we would do that scene and we'd go through it and make sure, okay, this is it. We'd go there, Philip would sit down, take, and he would always go out of the park then. I think it was, for you, it's definitely weird for me, but having so many people crowding Philip and looking, but not exactly engaging. It was just passive observers waiting to find every good bit of that take and going, yeah, that's great, or no, not that one. Next one.
That's amazing. I'm going to call you to time, if I may, because we have a number of speakers to get through. But
yes,
that's absolutely fascinating. And can I just say, I think I speak for the group when I say that when Philip gave us that demonstration of how he looked at the camera, suddenly it became alive. That's a really useful lesson all of us on Zoom should take. because suddenly we're all used to sort of looking down and around and but actually when we to make eye contact with that funny little round circle that is the camera, it's completely different. And it was apparent, Philip, when you were speaking there, that you've obviously spent quite a long time focusing on that. That was amazing. I've got so many questions, but thank you very much for that, everybody. So now we're going to move straight on to our second speaker, who is Joe Strickland from Chronic Insanity Theatre. And I know very little about what he's going to talk about, other than it's to do with being alive. So I'm going to pass over to Joe.
Hi, everyone. Hi. I was in the situation a lot of us were, where we were making work and then the pandemic hits. Normally I make theatre in kind of found and traditional spaces, whatever space we can really find, to be perfectly honest, that we can stick a play in. And then suddenly we had to make work online. And fortunately for us, given that our reason to be as a company is just to like make work and get it in front of people, making work for a digital platform was actually very similar, at least for us, to making work for just like a found space, like under a tree in a park or in the attic space above a pub or something. We try and approach doing digital theatre as if it's site-specific theatre. I think we like using the phrase website specific. The idea that in the same way that if you're doing a site-specific show, you go to that site, you do like a recce, you figure out all of the quirks of that site, which of these are problems we have to overcome, which of these are going to be features built into the show. And we approach doing digital theatre in very much the same way. If we're doing a play over WhatsApp, for example, what are the benefits of this? Well, we can do speech, we can use GIFs and emojis, so we can convey stuff in a very different way. We can use that very heavily and then cuddle that out suddenly. There's different ways to play with tension. What's it difficult to do? Actual visual or audio performances. You can maybe send a video or a voice note, but that should maybe be limited. And also then people have to play them in their own time. So there are some interaction elements with the timing of the rest of the pieces, just as an example. As I said at the beginning, our company does 12 shows in 12 months. That's what we aim to do. We try and aim to make them as different and as individual as possible. And we go for both quantity and quality. We don't think that we have to sacrifice on the quality of the show by doing a huge number of them. A lot of the shows that I've seen have been some of the best shows I've seen have been student shows that were done in like 10 days by a very small team of people while also doing degrees. So we know that great work can be made by people while they're doing other things and in a short period of time, as long as they have the team and the support and the resources and they know what those are before making the show. So we always are very aware of what our limitations are and what avenues we have, and we try and make work that fits into that. Which brings us to remote theatre making and having to make work when we can't be in the same place as each other. I think firstly, I want to say that it's been I've really enjoyed making work remotely because it's really opened up a whole lot of avenues for us we wouldn't have otherwise. We've made work across the Atlantic with some people based in the UK and others based in the US. And we've made one of my favorite pieces of work we made, which was a sort of interactive text-based kind of corporate espionage experience called Miles Away, which slowly asks more and more of the audience to become more and more active and complicit in the breaking down of this company and slightly more and more illegal practices as well, which ends with the audience having to quit out of the experience, download a dodgy file with 1,000 people's leaked login information in it, and then email it to an email address they've been given using their actual email. So it completely breaks you out of the world. Is like, now affect change, do something that can be linked back to you that is dangerous in the real world. You know it's the right thing to do because you've gotten this far in the experience. Are you going to do it or not? So we kind of really try to make, and it kind of builds and builds and builds until you're at that point where you're making a difficult decision. And we did that across, none of us have ever met in person. We had a co-director and 2 performers based in the US, in New York, Pittsburgh, all sorts of different places. And then I co-wrote and co-directed it. Our other co-writer was based in Birmingham, never met her before in real life either. And over about 2 months, we made the show, which we're very proud of and got a lot of good reviews and got a lot of good audience feedback. And we've managed to kind of restage again as part of the thing. And it's gone really well. And I've worked with a whole load of people I wouldn't have worked with if it hadn't been for remote theatre making. People who are now associate artists of our company, who are based all over the country, some international, who we wouldn't have been able to connect with if we were just making work in Nottingham or in the East Midlands or wherever we lay our hat for that festival or that commission or whatever. But obviously remote theatre making has a lot of potential issues. Firstly, it's like technological. Obviously, you have to make sure people have good enough internet connections, technology for whatever you want to do. Also comfortable spaces. Like, we don't necessarily want to be stuck in our front room doing hours of rehearsals and then have to spend the evening there. So do we get out and about? Do we try and rehearse in different spaces? Do we rehearse, we have to kind of think about all those things in the same way that you kind of leave your house, enter a rehearsal room, and now you can almost like switch off and focus. Are there ways to do that for doing things remotely? But another benefit is that if you're doing things remotely, you don't have to pay for rehearsal space. And hiring rehearsal space is such a massive fee, massive cost in any budget. Rehearsing remotely removes that cost and means that not only can we maybe do shows for less budget, which then means we can pass those savings on to audiences. A lot of our work is pay what you decide as a result of us being able to make these kind of savings as a result of making digital work. But yeah, it also means that maybe that's more money we could just invest into the show in the first place. And that's more money we can pay practitioners, we can pay creatives. If we're not paying for rehearsal space, we can hire another performer, we can hire another creative technologist, we can hire a choreographer or an illustrator, depending on the project. And I'd much rather make sure that if we're fortunate enough to get funding, that it goes into the hands of artists rather than landlords. But then, so there are always benefits and always weaknesses to working remotely. And I think the main thing we've always tried to do is pick the right project. There are shows we really want to do, and we haven't been able to because they have to be in a theatre. They have to be on a stage in front of a live audience. They are important to be said in a space where you can see a human being telling you a story. You can empathize with them, which is harder to do through a screen than it is in person. You can feel like that thing that is happening is present and live and immediate, because then there's some primal animal part of your brain that kicks in and is like, something's happening on stage. If that's dangerous, if that's a fight or something that could potentially be harmful, I'm nearby, could that be harmful to me? If that's something that's beneficial and fun and exciting, do I get to join in? You know, us as social animals, we see something happening on stage, you know, we might be hiding in the kind of shadows, the kind of voyeuristic audience watching something well lit happening on stage, but it's still present, it's still nearby, and we feel that as more real. Whereas through a screen, there's a certain amount of desensitization unless we're maybe familiar with what's happening or with the performer or the situation. But ultimately, liveness is something that's perceived, right? It's not technically a quality of the work, it's a quality of the audience. You know, in the same way that I'm looking at a screen and hearing any noise coming from it, I'm looking at a stage and hearing any noise coming from it. And maybe we don't quite have technology that provides things like smell and taste and touch, but also those aren't massively utilized senses within a theatrical world anyway, not normally, occasionally and to great effect, sure, but not usually the case. It's still usually audio and visual. So to that extent, can we make a live thing that has been created and is being performed remotely? And I think the answer is yes. And I think the key way of doing it is by using digital theatre to tell digital stories. Much in the same way that I think local theatres should tell stories about their local communities to their local audiences, and then larger, well-funded national institutions should tell national stories of every ilk for every person in the country to hypothetically come and see and feel represented by. I think digital theatre's niche that it should embrace is telling digital stories. I'm sure we've all seen shows that have tried to tell, you know, an on-stage theatre show that's tried to tell part of its story digitally, and there's just a load of projections of screens, and it doesn't quite do it justice. And sometimes they do, but a lot of the times it's really difficult to kind of convey and get right. But we did a play in WhatsApp, and we did that by having a bunch of automated WhatsApp accounts, some keyboard macro software that could type messages into the right accounts at the right times, 0 performers, but we didn't need human performers. We needed text to happen at the right times on the screen. We invited the audience in, we blocked them from being able to message anything, and they just watched the performance happen. And it was a horror play, and we had audiences terrified because all of the elements were still there, that tension, that voyeurism of the audience, you know, sitting and watching something happening in the same space. In a WhatsApp group, you're the same distance from that conversation as any of the characters are. So if something bad happens to them, if they get bumped off one by one, you feel like you could be next because those characters aren't in the same space. They share a digital space that you're also sharing. So that liveness and immediacy still comes across. And enough for people to be terrified, to have that primal reaction to some sort of stimulus or event that they perceive as happening near enough to them that they need to, you know, respond and get ready. You know, their sympathetic nervous system kicks in, and their fight or flight, their, you know, adrenaline. I think that's the kind of main takeaway, is that I think if we're remote working and we're making work remotely for remote audiences, that obviously it's much more accessible for people. Obviously it can be much more affordable for people. A huge amount of the CO2 and the energy spent making work is for audiences traveling. So it's also much more sustainable to make work digitally and remotely. But it's still absolutely 100% theatre, because you can absolutely still create those live, immediate experiences, but it's a different genre. So you have to do that in a different way. and we've only been doing it for about a year and a half. So of course we haven't all figured out how to do that yet. Theatre's thousands of years old, and digital theatre at most is about 30 if people who first got the internet have been making it, and really it's about a year and a half for most of us. So we got to wait a bit and we keep trying and championing people who are doing great work, like all of these, the people on this panel are. But I think it's when we find stuff, we have to really take it, champion it, and realize what it is that's making it theatre, that's making it digital, and it's making it exciting. And I think that it's liveness, it feeling immediate. Because so much happens online that feels distant and feels far away that we get desensitized to. And I think not only can making digital theatre feel live and immediate, and finding the best ways to tell those stories so that they feel like they're happening and that they are worthy of attention when compared to everything else that could be popping up in a notification on the screen you're watching a play on. But I think then if we can figure that out, maybe we can then take it one step further. And in the same way that theatre is innately political and can affect real world behaviour and change and sympathy and empathy, then if we can figure out that way of trying to hone and create more empathy in the stories we tell online, maybe that can carry over, and we can create any system online that allows that empathy and that recognition of us being humans and all in this together to come forwards. And I think that would do a whole heap of good. So maybe that's where we can go for this, but we're only a year and a half in, so we can't expect it to have happened yet. But let's all keep going.
Wow.
We'll get there.
Absolutely incredible. Thank you so much, Joe. My goodness, I'm getting my mind blown every time people talk. It's just incredible. Again, huge amounts of questions. And I'm particularly, I think I would quite like an embroidery of, digital theatre should perhaps tell digital stories. Bothering me for a long time, and that I think is probably behind the reason why Be More Chill will not get a long run in the West End. But anyway, that's a whole other thing, and we could talk about that later. Yes, I think now we're going to pass straight over to our final speaker on the panel. Again, I'm just remind everybody, if you've got any questions and you don't want to forget them, or you want to ask them in the meantime, just put them in the chat, and at the end we'll go through the Q&A. But if things occur to us at the end, then we'll ask them then. So I'm going to pass over to Tanya Holland Williams of Fat Lady Opera. And what should I say about this? I'm so sorry. I should say, oh yes, of course, music is the
Yes. So I've got a little clip that I'm going to play in a second. In fact, two I've realised that might be interesting to see. The show that came out for Fat Lady Opera of last year was something called Persephone's Dream, and it was off the back of something that we'd done before COVID called the Invisible Opera House. So I think there was already this sense of how do you create what is actually not really real, as we all do in theatre all the time. But so some of the big immediate sort of in my face thoughts were all the choirs across the land, all the community choruses, all the opera houses that I know, like theatres, have gone dark. But those singers that the UK's got such a big heritage for promoting in terms of community. A place to be a community in has also sort of died a death, and actually it's become really unsafe. Singing felt like it was a really unsafe practice. So there was all of that. There was the sort of shutting down and withdrawing that was reminding me of a sort of mass hibernation, and I felt like all of my Zoom interactions were sort of incomplete transactions. And yeah, I suppose I just I felt myself going into a really isolated space where I just couldn't work with people in the physical world. I was spending a ton of time on my own. And Persephone's Dream emerged as a sort of bit of a narrative out of that, alongside I've got no demand to make a work right now. So why don't we just have a see what's possible with this thing called Zoom? And so that I can't, and Janet, if you think of anything, please do drop in, because Spartak are actually the co-producers of Persephone's Dream. No, we the co-producers, was it Kevin? I can't remember now, but you were definitely heavily involved. And at that point, there was no music, there was no story, there was nothing but some interested, adventurous types that wanted to explore. And I think really that's the positives are that you suddenly find, like Joe has, like you guys have from Lucid, you find people that are actually going to go on a journey with you. And I definitely felt that was what happened with Persephone's Dream. And the guys, so you'll see behind, this is one of the really early little, let's just get together and see how we can explore this space. And what came out of this was this became the chorus of curious eyes that were the, if you like, the on their journey between the earth and Hades. So it was a sort of retelling of the Greek legend that we ended up playing around with. And one of the other massive joys of this, if you don't know Sarah Jane Booth, the set and costume designer, she's amazing. And every time I met her, I felt like she watered my spirit. For example, so fairly early on, I was saying that I felt like we were ending up with a sort of, we could get proximity. Should have said I really love ensemble work, and that's been definitely a hallmark of my portfolio over the years, is working with groups for collective atmosphere. So 20 people can make fear happen in a way that one person can, but there's an electricity about ensemble movement. So I was really wanting to see what was possible in terms of ensemble movement here, but we'd got to a point fairly early on where I felt that the two-dimensionality of the screen was giving me a bit of a headache, and also just becoming sort of one-trick pony, at which point Sarah pitched up with, and I'm just going to share the screen, with this wonderful thing that Zoom can do. So this whole thing of having to spend time alone and look after yourself and protect yourself or tell yourself off or wash your hands 20 times, to happy birthday twice, all of this sort of some of the strangeness of our experience of sort of being in our own heads and having to protect ourselves became something that we could incorporate, and we could suddenly populate the stage, as it were, with more bodies. Yeah. There were a number of moments like that, but that was one, as I was just thinking about this just now, I was like, yeah, I must show that, because we then we could start doing sort of more ritualistic ensemble movements. Let me just show you some of the film. If you could just give me a thumbs up if you can hear this. You can, great, lovely. It goes a bit quiet now. So we had moving film footage. So as Zoom developed its offer, so we just tried to capitalise on everything, every new move that Zoom made. We asked ourselves if we could get it in. These are the sort of 5 scenes that came out, all based on different stages of sleep, and a question about whether we actually were going to, as a human race, how we were going to wake up, whether there was going to be any change. And you can see there the so this went to the Cockpit Theatre right up to literally the day before. We were working with different what do you call it? Different permissions around where the audience could be, where the cellist could be, where the singer could be, and whether the technicians that we need were going to be available. I really hope never to have to go through quite that again. We didn't manage to get the Zoom screen exactly as I would have wanted it, but you get a sense there. The figures should have been around 3 times larger than that across the back, but you get a little sense of how they were responding. The main problem about this setup was that the characters in the Zoom room couldn't see what was happening on stage, so they had to take oral cues all the way, which everybody I'm sure already knows meant that there was a latency issue all the way through, which we then had to build in to the sort of scoring of the whole piece. The other thing that I don't know if it's clear, but this dress is a one massive figure thing that sort of held, it was great. It held the character in place so that she couldn't actually do a whole heap of changing of movement. She certainly couldn't get any closer to the audience. And then it had these wonderful functions of being able to become a living sort of forest towards the end. Safe and sound. The tide runs inward, unsure where it belongs. All safe and sad within. Mountains gaze the breath of wings, and the wide sea song. Small things wait my eye. That thread cold. Page torn. So throughout the piece, I was very interested in this idea of how magnified things were becoming in our minds, and the minutiae with which I won't play the rest of this. I can send it to a link to anyone that's interested, but it just gives an overview. I will just see if I can find there. That's it. Yeah. The chief and cold. So there was a scene called Purification, which was that thing that I mentioned about just wanting to start to populate the stage with more bodies that were engaged in a sense of sort of cleaning ourselves and, you know, basically that cathedral-esque sense that opera, I think really strong opera should have, even in the most small, intimate pieces. And that was one of the ways in which we were exploring it. I think very happy to just stop there and answer any questions or make any more observations as we go along, because I'm just looking at the time. I'm going to stop there, Kate.
Thank you, Janet. That's absolutely brilliant. Fantastic. Well, can't see any questions actually in the chat at the moment, but if anybody has a question, by all means, raise your digital or real hand. I don't mind which, and we can come to you. Anybody got any burning issues at the moment? Because I have oodles. So shall I just kick off? I'm happy to kick off. Shall I start at the beginning and go through? So going back to Molly and Adam, let me find the right page. One second. Oh yes, okay. Yes. So I mean, I'm really fascinated that basically what you had to do, having come out of theatre and theatre training in your university, thinking theatre meant live, suddenly you're having to adopt and learn all of these film skills and coding skills. So I'm just wondering, as you know, you are obviously young emerging artists. Do you think that that's something that, I mean, I suppose this is open to Joe as well, really. Do you think that this is something that should be incorporated into theatre training in years to come, that it as a matter of course?
Well,
Mm,
I think coming from, well, just youth in general, it's such a wide part of life that I think the past year everyone has become a lot more digitally literate, I suppose. And a lot of our training focused mostly on digital. As Joe said, digital spaces within site-specific theatre. I did a few things on that, like blast theory and such, which was a big component of, I think, from Karen, was something that we looked at for Philip 21, really. So I think a lot of our training there is more towards postmodern kind of stories when it comes to digital stuff. So stuff that's very abstract and could be seen as quite there's a doorway that you need to go through to get it, and it's not very accessible. So I think digital stuff going forward from here should definitely be incorporated more. And I know for a fact that it has been in university like this past year, because we've gone in and helped people kind of figure out that part. If you guys got anything else down?
Well, I was just going to say that I think it would be good for students to definitely explore the what theatre means to them and what it can be, because that's something that we obviously we were familiar. What we focus on is immersive theatre. So what we had to do is break down itself. Well, what does immersive theatre mean to us, and can it mean all these different things? It doesn't have to be this black and white, you know, in a little box kind of thing that we learned at uni. And I think, going off something that Joe said, like, I think capturing that liveness doesn't have to be this bog standard, oh, someone's in front of me on the stage. Like, you can capture liveness in so many different ways. And again, that is something that would be interesting to see students explore more, or be encouraged to explore more. Yeah.
Thank you. I'm just interested to throw it over to Philip about the camera, because you mentioned that it was a partnership with Screen South, and I'm just wondering, what camera did you have? Was it because I'm imagining a lot of theatre making online at the moment, and I know I've done it, is done on your mobile, but this sounds as if it was a more technically proficient setup, and that you were actually supported by proper camera people and proper camera equipment. Was that the case?
I definitely say it was the case. Yeah, the camera was amazing. I got really giddy about it. Yeah, but it's also a case of you don't really need to have this amazing quality. It's mainly about what you put. Like, quality helps, but it's definitely about what you put out and how you put it out. Especially, like, if you really want the quality there, you can definitely go about different ways of like creating that. So if you wanted to have like crisp sound or something like that, you could definitely like buy a normal microphone, but make sure you focus on certain moments that really like have that intensity as it would in theatre. But I mean, mobile phones are really literally like, they're very tricked out these days. They definitely have like, they're about they're about the same megapixels as a DSLR these days. So realistically, you're not really like tied to having to, oh my god, I need to get this film camera or like this certain special camera. Yeah,
I
Joe.
see Joe's raised his hand. Joe, did you have a question for
No,
Elizabeth?
not a question, but something to add into the chat was just that I had at the start of the pandemic, I had a really old phone, and we too were filming most of our stuff on a camera. So my tip is go on eBay, buy a secondhand smartphone. I got like a Google Pixel 2 XL with a broken screen, because normally the phones still work, they're just not aesthetically pleasing and they're much more affordable. We got one for like 25 quid. And the phone works perfectly well. All the cameras front and back still work, and Google Pixels have really good cameras. So that's what we've used to film a whole bunch of our stuff, and it's a really good camera phone with a decent mic in it as well. Then it costs us like 20 quid plus postage. So there are ways to get affordable quality. You have to think a little outside the box for them, but yeah, Philip's completely right. You don't necessarily need like the best tech. The content is always going to be more important than the quality.
And
I think a lot
talking of that
is-
content, that's what I was going to come on to you with, Joe. Actually, is about you mentioned short pieces as well. That sometimes the pieces that you're producing are quite short, and of course we live in a world of TikTok and all the rest of it. So, how much does that influence the length of the pieces that you put out?
It started to more and more. So we haven't necessarily done any like 30-second pieces yet. I think our shortest is still about 15-20 minutes, which is means of production, which is on as part of Electric Medway. But we did a show for Brighton Fringe a few months ago, which was 50 minutes. And I realized that 50 minutes is 130-second chunks. So that show was written as 130-second pieces of performance that could then later on be refilmed and restaged and released online in lots of small bite-sized chunks that all made sense to watch individually, let alone as a piece from start to finish. So it started to influence the way in which we think about making work. And we're going to make some pieces that are discrete, shorter pieces in the future. But I think you can still make longer pieces, just to think about how they might necessarily be consumed in smaller chunks. And I think that can be a really interesting way of writing. I found it very interesting to write a play in a spreadsheet, writing 30 seconds of drama in each cell, rather than writing it in a script. And actually, I found that really liberating and interesting. So yeah, I would recommend really trying to, there aren't any rules. The internet is the Wild West. Do what you want.
True, this is true. And then international, you talked about the international links at LinkUps. I'm very interested in this because across Electric Medway, we've had pieces that are, despite using people in different countries, they have all chosen to be inside black box interiors, and I understand that they're trying to create being in the one world together. But I'm also wondering if you've explored making use of the fact that somebody's got the Canadian Mounties or whatever it is behind them, as opposed to a wall, So have you experimented with that at all? And what are your thoughts on bringing that internationalism into the view of the viewer?
Occasionally. I don't think we've done it in an international sense, but we did a show last August that had a cast of 53 people in it, each doing a small performance. And we didn't want 53 performances in front of a white bedroom wall. So we really encouraged people to go and perform in front of as interesting a background as possible. And we got some really, there are some people that lived in some very lovely rural areas and like abandoned quarries that had all overgrown with heather, or were the gatekeepers for like a crypt in a church and went and filmed there because they had access and they knew no one would bother them. So we got some really lovely short pieces of performance out of that. I think, again, that's a thing. I think people spend so much time and so many resources trying to build sets on stage, and site specific theatre has the benefit of being able to, that look and aesthetic is already there. I think digital theatre can really embrace that as well. If, you can go to and perform in the location that you want to much more easily with digital theatre than with site specific, or than rebuilding somewhere on a stage. So I would love to see more of it. I can't wait to see what it is.
Yeah, I'm very interested in that stuff. And then finally, Tanya, I'm interested in, so your project particularly seems to have arisen out of the needs that we had in that moment. I lead a sing-along group that started online, kind of by accident, but there you are. And one of our members is here tonight. She attests to the fact that online it was very much everybody had to accept they were just going to be singing to themselves because it was very difficult to get the sound, not to lag, and music is particularly difficult online. So it sounds like that was your starting point in many ways, overcoming the problems of the medium and the barriers of the medium and what needs that then needed to fulfill in people. Is that always your starting point? That's what I'm intrigued about. I'm sort of comparing and contrasting a little bit with Joe, where he's saying our aim is to make shows and get them in front of people. So I'm interested in, how do you identify what those needs are for those people, particularly in the digital frame of reference?
Yeah, I think it was a blend actually, because I feel like when I start to pull a show together, that there's some story at the heart of it. There's a story, and I don't know what that story is going to be from one production to the next. This was a story about mass hibernation, effectively, and the sort of the impact on our souls and our psyche and our, so that was the story. And then in a way that also became the journey. If you took the sort of music and the actual plot away, that I feel like that also became the story for the participants. I would even say the if you like, the guys, the cellist and the composers, who I should say Kevin was a composer from Sparked Echo, Anna Braithwaite, who you saw there, and Gavin Alexander. There were three composers, but very much the participants, I would say at least half of them would have identified, and I noticed that somebody's done this in the chat as well, Tilly and Dell, that being technophobes, that there was a sort of reluctance, so in brief terms, a reluctance to engage and a fear about engaging with the technical world and what that would do to their own sense of themselves as community singers or singers. A sense of, how do I go from how do I make the journey myself, that, and Philip, you sort of touched on this a bit earlier on as well, how do I lose everything behind me, my sort of cat walking across the back and my this and that, and how do I sort of log into the that electricity that we get when we're in the flow of a really good performance. How that was three. There were one or two others where I feel like, yeah, they couldn't see the I mean, it's a bit of a misnomer really, calling them the chorus of curious eyes. They actually couldn't see anything on the stage, so they had to trust. So I think there were a ton of things that were about our big human global experience that on a very specific level those participants went through. And if I look back on other stuff that I'm interested in, actually I'm not saying that it gets quite to the heart of it all the time like I felt this one did, but that's definitely what I'm interested in. What's the heart of our experience right now? Can we make it work for people?
Fantastic, thank you. Are there any questions on the floor? Anybody got a hand up that I'm missing or anything? Or any in the chat? People say, Tilly and Dell saying, just want to say they love both of Tanya's sessions on Saturday, and that this Persephone piece of work looks extraordinary too, and I must check it out if it's still available to watch somehow. And Joe, you mentioned that you have something in the festival. And Hallucid, of course, your Philip 21 is available too. So I urge people to check them out. I'm just going to ask you each to, in turn again, to wrap up with a final take I would like us to go with from the conversation today. And I know that Adam, you were mentioning thinking about the future and what's next. So if you want to give us a sense of what might be next for Hallucid, please do. But I'm just putting in the chat a form for feedback, somewhere we're running out of time desperately. If anybody who's watching would be able to quickly fill it in, it's a snap poll, so it is very quick, and you'll be able to do that at the same time as listening to our panelists, giving us a wrap up on their takeaways. So Adam and Molly, kick us off again.
Well, something that we utilized in Philip 21 was something called a branch and bottleneck system, which is essentially the story branches out and then it bottlenecks again, and it can branch out and it carries on. And that's something that personally I'd like to take more into kind of live conversations and live kind of immersive theatres, where we can actually just have a conversation with someone who's in the audience, and then, oh, hello, Ken. The pen always happens, so then that can move on. So yeah, I'm really looking forward to the future and seeing how we can kind of splice these different kind of things within live theatres as well as digital. Yeah.
Fantastic.
I guess my takeaway would be to kind of embrace digital theatre a lot more. I think in the early kind of process, I was fighting it a lot and thinking, well, how can I make this digital theatre piece as much like theatre as I can? And I think, Joe, you kind of, inspired this thought in something that you said, like digital theatre in itself has become its own genre, and it doesn't have to be, it's in itself something. So it doesn't have to be, digital theatre trying to portray, I don't know, something that should have been on stage. It can be digital theatre, I can't remember what the words were you used, telling a digital story. And I think we should really make the effort to kind of congratulate each other as well, like embracing this very young genre that has come out of this year. And I think
just in this panel, the difference between the different offers is phenomenal. So I mean, that's just in this little panel. So that's, I think, really something to be noted. I wonder how much more.
Exactly. Yeah.
Philip, did you have a takeaway for us?
I guess, well, it's more a generalization and more of a thing that people should start doing, is just to start doing. I think, again, doesn't matter what you have or what you don't have, just start doing something, and then along the way you'll probably get better with it, so then you can just put it out there. Just start putting stuff out there, realistically. That's it.
Excellent. Yes, don't just dream it, be it. And over to Joe. What's your takeaway, Joe? You've sort of indicated some takeaways just already, but
yeah, well, my takeaway was going to be exactly what Philip just said. That idea of like there's so much out there. A lot of it is accessible. A lot of it is cheap, or at least free trials for things. Get software, figure it out. Watch a load of YouTube tutorials, watch a load of TED Talks, get inspired, make some stuff, and don't be afraid to make terrible things. You've got to make terrible things before you know how to make good things. So make all your terrible stuff. Do it now when people aren't really paying attention. Everyone's going out to the theatre, and not do all your terrible stuff now. Then wait till they all come back, and you'll be great at it. Yeah.
Brilliant. Love that. Thank you. And last but my name is least, top of the bill, we have Tanya.
I suppose two things. One is try and see as much and experience as much as possible, because certainly as somebody that's definitely older than most of the other people in this Zoom, I feel like the more I can just experience and get inspired by, the braver I will be. And then I suppose the follow-up to that is that, and then when you've experienced something and you've really come away buzzing, go back and think about what it was. Wrap up all those other things that Molly and Adam and Philip and Joe have said. Is the story that I want to tell going to be best told through a similar vernacular? What are the other things that I've just been experiencing over the last few months? It's about keeping yourself refreshed. I think that one of the things that has been really, I've found personally, a real struggle the last year and a half is the replenishment of my practice, because of the absence of not being in a space where I'm actually face to face with other creatives. And that replenishment of practice, I just would urge everybody to keep doing it, because then you will keep doing it.
Fantastic. Well, we've gone over our time, but I think that's fair. We started a little bit late, and we've managed to cover, I think, everything. So, and my goodness, I'm inspired, and I'm determined to see it now as an extra limb, and to explore it further. But thank you very much once more to Molly Young and Adam Glenn, to Joe Strickland, to Philip Offe, and to Tanya Holland Williams. Good night, everybody, and I hope to see you all soon. The next talk is coming up tomorrow. Please don't miss it. It is about disability access and disabled arts. So please feel free to check out the next live conversation with Wendy Dawes and Christopher Sacra. Thanks very much, and good night, everybody.